Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Narayanam Naraskricham Naram Chaivam Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudidayet Nasa Prayeshu Nabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloker Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, third chapter, text number 24. Sarashma Saram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanayar Harinama Jayai Yadgriyamano Harinama Jayai Navikriyetata Yada Vikaro Netre Jalam Gatra Raheshu Harshaha Netre Jalam Gatra Ruheshu Harshaha Sarashma Saram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanayar Harinama Deyai Navikare Tata Yada Vikaro Netre Jalam Gatra Ruhesha Harshaha Tat that Ashmasaram is steel framed. Hridayam heart. Bhata idam certainly that. Yat which Griyamanai in spite of chanting Harinama the holy name of the Lord Jayai by concentration of the mind Na does not Vikriyeta change Ata thus Yada when Vikaraha reaction Netre in the eyes Jalam tears Gataruheshu at the pores Harshaha eruptions of ecstasy. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Certainly that heart is steel framed which, in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place. Tears fill the eyes and the hairs stand on end. Then responsively, certainly that heart is steel framed which, in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place. Tears fill the eyes and the hairs stand on end. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. We should note with profit that in the first three chapters of the second canto, a gradual process of development of devotional service is being presented. In the first chapter, the first step is devotional service for God consciousness by the process of hearing and chanting. Has been stressed, and a gross conception of the personality of Godhead in His universal form for the beginners is recommended. By such a gross conception of God, through the material manifestations of His energy, one is enabled to spiritualize the mind and the senses and gradually concentrate the mind upon Lord Vishnu, the Supreme, who is present as a super soul in every heart and everywhere, in every atom of the material universe. The system of Pancha Upasana, recommending 5 mental attitudes for the common man, is also enacted for this purpose, namely, gradual development, worship of the superior that may be in the form of fire, electricity, the sun, the mass of living beings, Lord Shiva, and at last, the impersonal supersoul, the partial representation of Lord Vishnu. They are all nicely described in the second chapter, but in the third chapter, further development is prescribed after one has actually reached the stage of Vishnu worship, or pure devotional service. And the mature stage of Vishnu worship is suggested herein in relation to the change of heart. The whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So, with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. Vidhi Bhakti, or regulated devotional service by the limbs of the body, namely the eyes, the ears, the nose, the hands, and the legs, as already explained herein before, is now stressed herein in relation to the mind, which is the impetus for all activities of the limbs of the body. It is expected by all means that by discharging regulated devotional service, one must manifest the change of heart. If there is no such change, the heart must be considered steel frame, for it is not melted even when there is chanting of the holy name of the Lord. We must always remember that hearing and chanting are the basic principles of discharging devotional duties, and if they are properly performed, there will follow the reactional ecstasy with signs of tears in the eyes and standing of the hairs on the body. These are natural consequences and are preliminary symptoms of the bhava stage, which occurs before one reaches the perfectional stage of prema, love of Godhead. If the reaction does not take place, even after continuous chanting and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offenses only. That is the opinion of the Sandarbha. In the beginning of chanting of the holy name of the Lord, if the devotee has not been very careful about evading the 10 kinds of offenses at the feet of the holy name, certainly the reactions of feelings of separation will not be visible by tears in the eyes and standing of the hair on end. The bhava stage is manifested by 8 transcendental symptoms, namely inertness, perspiration, standing of hairs on end, failing in the voice, trembling, paleness of the body, tears in the eyes, and finally, trance. The Nectar Devotion, a summary study of Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, explains these symptoms and vividly describes other transcendental developments, both in steady and accelerating manifestations. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti has very critically discussed all these bhava displays in connection with some unscrupulous neophytes imitating the above symptoms for cheap appreciation. Not only Vishwanath Chakravarti, but also Srila Goswami, Rupa Goswami, treated them very critically. Sometimes all the above 8 symptoms of ecstasy are imitated by the mundane devotees, prakrita sahajiyas. But the pseudo symptoms are at once detected when one sees the pseudo devotee addicted to so many forbidden things. Even though decorated with signs of devotee, a person addicted to smoking, drinking, or illegitimate sex with women cannot have all the above mentioned ecstatic symptoms. But it is seen that sometimes these symptoms are willfully imitated. And for this reason, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti accuses the imitators of being stone-hearted men. They are sometimes even affected by the reflections of such transcendental symptoms. But if they still do not give up the forbidden habits, they are hopeless cases for transcendental realization. When Lord Chaitanya met Srila Ramananda Roy of Kabor on the bank of the Godavari, the Lord developed all these symptoms. But because of the presence of some non-devotee Brahmins who were attendants of the Raya, the Lord suppressed these symptoms. So sometimes they are not visible, even in the body of the first-class devotee, for certain circumstantial reasons. Therefore, real, steady bhava is definitely displayed in the matter of cessation of material desires, shanti, utilization of every moment in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, of varta kalatvam, eagerness for glorifying the Lord constantly, namagane sadaruchi, attraction for the land of the Lord, pritista vasati stale, complete detachment from material happiness, virakti, and pridelessness, mana sunyata. One who has developed all these transcendental qualities is really possessed of the bhava stage, as distinguished from the stone-hearted imitator or mundane devotee. The whole process can be summarized as follows. The advanced devotee who chants the holy name of the Lord in a perfectly offenseless manner and is friendly to everyone can actually relish the transcendental taste of glorifying the Lord. And the result of such realization is reflected in the cessation of all material desires, etc., as mentioned above. The neophytes, due to their being in the lower stage of devotional service, are invariably envious, so much so that they invent their own ways and means of devotional regulations without following the acharyas. As such, even if they make a show of constantly chanting the holy name of the Lord, they cannot relish the transcendental taste of the holy name. Therefore, the show of tears in the eyes, trembling, perspiration, or unconsciousness, etc., is condemned. They can, however, get in touch with a pure devotee of the Lord and rectify their bad habits. Otherwise, they shall continue to be stone-hearted and unfit for any treatment. A complete, progressive march on the return path back to home will depend on the instruction of the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee. Kind of a long and sort of combative, in a way, purport. The verse again. Certainly that heart is steel-framed, which, in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes, and the hairs stand on end. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum vangayate girimya kripatarham bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. The last sentence of the purport is pretty instructive. He says, Prabhupada writes, a complete progressive march on the return path home, back to Godhead, will depend on the instructions of the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee. So in a sense, he's indicating that one not only has to read regularly to get these instructions of, as he says, the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee, but one has to do this regularly. Therefore, one of the reasons that Prabhupada has directed the continuous daily recitation of the Bhagavatam, because it's a way of studying, not just reading once or twice or thrice, but studying the actual teachings. And in a lecture, I think it was in 1977. It was kind of it was a lecture on the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada had people reading the book, and then he would expound on what was said. He said this was in 1972, actually. Now that I think of it, 1972, shortly after the book was printed. He said that every one of you, I'm paraphrasing, but he said that every one of you, he was talking to the devotees who were listening to the lecture, must read this book, not once or twice, but study it, talking about Nectar of Devotion. So Prabhupada said once that does anyone know what he said what his only complaint was? Do you remember anyone? He said, my only complaint is. Yeah, he did say that at least once, and maybe he said it more than once, but he said, my only complaint is the people aren't reading my books. And he used to get up in the wee small hours of the morning, sometimes at 2 o'clock or before, and translate books like Nectar of Devotion and the Srimad Bhagavatam. So it was a great hardship to think about it. Anyone who would get up in the middle of that night when it was dark outside and work every day on translating books, and that people wouldn't read the books, it was a little discouraging for Prabhupada, actually. people were very enthusiastic to distribute books, but he did say that if someone says, you're selling these books, what do they mean? And someone says, I don't know what they mean, I don't read them, I just sell them. And he was kind of making a little bit of a sarcastic remark. But that was his main complaint, that people didn't read the books. So reading books is crucial. It's the reason why people stay in Krishna consciousness. In the beginning, it's very attractive because of the cleanliness and the friendship and the camaraderie and the food and the singing and the music and the dancing. It's all very attractive. And everybody's attracted to singing and dancing and good food. But after a while, it gets a little more difficult. One encounters obstacles of various kinds, internally, externally, and with the body. And there's just a lot of obstacles that come into the picture. It's very, very, very recreational in the beginning and very much enjoyable. But as one pursues on the path, it's fraught with a lot of difficulty. Not a lot, not difficulties that can't be overcome, but most people don't overcome them. I think the phrase revolving door has been used about people that come and then they go and they come and they go. And we've had experience that most people that come here, they also go. I mean, people that come into the temple, men that shave their heads, women that wear saris, they go away after a while because it's not an easy, fun process. It gets more and more difficult. Part of Krishna consciousness is austerity. We're told that we can't intoxicate, we can't drink, we can't eat meat, and we can't do these things. We can't have illicit sex. And so there's a form of austerity that goes along with this recreation that makes it difficult. And some people have even said, and in Prabhupada quotes, there was one person in England, someone who was a governor of Bengal, an Englishman. And he asked one of Prabhupada's godbrothers if he could be made into a Brahmin. And the response was, yes, of course you can be made into a Brahmin. All you have to do is avoid illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and meat eating. And he said, impossible. That was his response. Impossible. And this was a very, very learned, educated, and highly placed officer in the British government, Marquis of Jetland, I think it was. And but it's difficult to give up these things. But on the other hand, it's very easy, it's very simple, because there's a greater feeling. And Prabhupada once, when he came, I think it was in 1972, to the Bhaktivedanta Manor. He came from the airport, he was just visiting, came from Heathrow Airport to Bhaktivedanta Manor. And ordinarily it's kind of like a arduous drive. It's about a 45-minute or 50-minute drive, and it's congested and so on. But a helicopter can do it in about 15 minutes or less. And it was a sort of a typical May day in England, very windy and blustery and drizzly. It was kind of interesting. I was there at the time. This helicopter hovered over there's a big lawn at Bhaktivedanta Manor. It's about an acre. It's quite a large lawn. And the devotees saw this, they knew that Prabhupada was coming in the helicopter, and they saw the pilot waving to them. And what he was saying by his gesture was, get out of the way, I want to land this thing. And they thought he was waving, and they were waving back, hi. And finally they got the message, and they moved aside, and this helicopter landed. And then interestingly enough, Prabhupada used that example to that he didn't like the ride, actually, not just because it was windy and blustery, but because it was kind of uneventful. And he gave a lecture that very morning and said that this is why realizing Brahman is insufficient, because all I could think of when I was in that helicopter is, I want to get down. I want to get down. And he said that's what it's like in the Brahma Jyoti. Because there's no personal relationship. Either you have to go higher and have association with Krishna, or you come back down to the material world. And he gave several examples, or he told anyway that there were many examples of people who were very highly realized, very spiritually advanced, knowing they were not the body, and they attained the level of Brahman, and they ascribed to the motto of Brahma Satya Jagan Mitra. It means that Brahma is truth and everything in the world, Jagan Mitra, is false. Brahma is truth and Jagat, the world, is false. And he cited many examples of very highly elevated spiritualists who had reached this level of Brahman or Brahma Jyoti, and they returned back to Jagat, the false world of Jagat Mitra, to engage in various types of welfare work, education, and things of this world that were beneficial for human beings, but not love of Godhead. So when we chant Gayatri, it's kind of like a mantra to those of you who have second initiation, know what this mantra is, that we regard Krishna as a lovable person that we fall in love with. So that's the ultimate goal. It's not just a oneness, and I think Prabhupada also gave the example of when you're in an airplane or on a boat, you get kind of bored just seeing nothing but air, nothing but water, day after day after day after day. And finally, when you can see some land ahead, you become kind of like satisfied. Oh, I'm getting out of here, getting down. So that's what the realization of most people of that part of the world is like we want to merge into oneness with God. And it's not fully satisfactory for most people. Of course, one can progress from that level. It's very rare, but it does happen. It happened with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and a few other people who were very highly realized in that Brahma Jyoti, and somehow or other became Krishna conscious. They graduated into the higher levels of love of Godhead. It does happen. Yeah. So as this purport is a little long, but it's kind of combative in the sense that he's saying there are a lot of pretenders around, people who cry, they have tears in their eyes, and they shake and they tremble and they chant and they dance, but they're frauds or charlatans, as we say sometimes. There was a person representing the bowels. It's one of the pseudo-Vaishnav sects, the bowels, B-A-U-L-S, the bowels of Bengal. And somehow or other, they were imported from India to give a performance in one of the dance halls in San Francisco. On weekends they had big dances. So these guys came to the temple one day, the bowels. There was the leader, and there were 4 other people, and they were all wearing orange robes. And they had black hair, and kind of they looked like they were from that part of the world. And a little later on, they said, "Well, what do you guys do?" And we told them, we chant Hare Krishna. And they said, "Oh, that's nice." And then it so happened a few days later that there was a big kirtan in a place called the Straight Theater, formerly the Hate Theater. It was called the Straight Theater. That was the hippie version of Anyway, he was dancing, and the leader was dancing and turning around and around, really like the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And many of the people that were present thought it was a genuine article. They thought he was, really a highly realized devotee. And then he fell down and didn't move. And many people came up to him and started wondering what kind of a trance he was exhibiting. And even some devotees thought it was the real thing. Not all of them, but some. And I had a sixth sense. I have a suspicious nature, and I thought he was maybe faking. And I didn't know what to say. And then the next day, the devotees told Prabhupada a little bit about this event that took place in this theater. It had all the theater seats removed, and about the dancing, and about these people from Bengal. And they kind of gave a pretty favorable report. And then I said, but maybe he was imitating. I don't know. I just don't know. And then Prabhupada said, you should have said to him, "My dear Chaitanya," and then kicked on his face. And he gave a gesture of kicking with his right foot. So I felt a little bit exonerated from my suspicious nature, because Prabhupada knew that he was faking. And as he's been saying in these purports, there's a lot of these people who do this. They cry, they dance, they chant, and they're actually faking. It seems like Prabhupada had to fight every inch of the way in establishing the Krishna movement. Even in his homeland, there were a lot of people that thought, oh, it's wrong to have Westerners on the altar in places like the Vrindavan Temple. And Prabhupada had to fight with them. I mean, he eventually compromised and said some can and some can't, but they were admitted to the altar. And there was a controversy over when the temple in Bombay, it was then called Bombay, now Mumbai, was open. The controversy was what sort of rituals should be engaged before we install the deities and open the temple. And one faction said they have to be Brahmins from South India, 4 of them having the jugya. There's a courtyard in that temple, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been to that temple in Juhu Beach. There's a big room about twice the size of this room where the deities are installed, and that's the temple. And then there's a courtyard, an open air courtyard about the same size, just adjacent to it. So the place where it was open air was supposed to be the place where this yajna was to take place. So one faction said that they had to be Brahmins from South India, bona fide Brahmins of Saraswat Brahmin families from India. And the other faction said, well, why can't they be Western people? Why can't they be white people? And because the local people will appreciate the very fact that you're preaching to the Malechas and Yavanas, or whatever, And so this was the controversy. So Prabhupada ultimately decided that they would engage the Brahmins to satisfy the local people who were very much attached to a 1 week-long ritual that was executed by Brahmins from South India in their 50s and 60s. And when I arrived there, just a few weeks before the temple was open, that's what I saw. People sitting in front of a big yajna pit, people from South India doing their Sanskrit mantras, and that was... but it was a fight. I don't know if you know about the history of this temple, but the man who sold them the land tried to take it back, and he demolished the initial temple, and ultimately he died of a heart attack. And when Srila Prabhupada was informed about this person's death, he was actually a white-collar criminal. We might call him a white-collar criminal. We call him that in the States. He didn't jump for joy. He just said, and Shruti Kirti tells this story. He was massaging Prabhupada, and he was informed that man had died of a heart attack. And Prabhupada didn't say anything. He just paused for a long time, and finally he said, "You don't know how much trouble that man has caused me." And that was the end of that. So it was a fight all the way. And then he came to the West, and then there was all kinds of harassment going on in this country, and in England, and in Japan, and everywhere. But finally, most of these obstacles were overcome, fortunately. So that's probably all. It's a very long purport. I could probably talk for days about what Prabhupada said, but I think part of what he was saying was that it's not easy, and there are a lot of pretenders. So I'll stop there after. Any comments or questions? Anything? Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be about this purport or verse.
I found very interesting the purport, because it's a sort of summary of the first 3 chapters there. In the Bhagavatam very kindly allows people to progress at their own sort of level, and it seems like in ISKCON now we've adopted these methods. It's quite interesting, and like even here in New Govardhana we allow a nice gradual process for people to come. And when Srila Prabhupada came to sing, at the very beginning it was quite lenient, but then it became very strict and was either in or out. So can you speak about this change in the movement from the black and white to the nice shades of grey?
Well, Prabhupada has used the word gradual a couple of times in this purport, meaning that the whole process is meant to be a gradual one. And in the beginning of Prabhupada coming to the West, he was very, very friendly and not stressing the people's background or their sinful activities or like that. And later on, he would say to the same devotees, he would start telling them that there are certain regulations that you have to follow and certain gradations of progress in Krishna consciousness, and you're all of you are beginners or neophytes or rookies. It's not an easy, it's not a instantaneous path where you can gain perfection. So it was like fun in the beginning, but then it got more and more difficult. And the proof of it is that many people didn't stay with Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada was noted for saying that we shouldn't be surprised how many people leave the Krishna consciousness movement. We should be surprised at how many stay in the Krishna consciousness movement. So even though Krishna consciousness has grown and expanded and worldwide, there have been defections, so to speak, many. Okay, one more.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So the Hare Krishna movement, basically really took off in the early 70s. Since that time, it seems that there's been a lot more even though there's been wars happening around the world, the number of wars and the number of deaths from wars and genocide is very much gone down in the last 50 years compared to going back thousands of years. Do you think there's some correlation between the spreading of the Hare Krishna movement and these things like wars going right down?
I don't know if they're going down. I mean, I think, and I could be wrong, but it seems like they're going up. Anyway, it's a symptom of Kali Yuga that things get worse. And the Krishna conscious movement is not meant to get everyone to be blissful and happy. And, there's always going to be a minority of people that follow the Krishna consciousness movement, and especially in this age. But, I think once someone said to Prabhupada that there's less crime this year in the United States than there was the year before. Is that due to the Hare Krishna movement? And Prabhupada thought about it, and he didn't answer immediately. And then he said, yes, we will take credit for that. But it wasn't as if that the progress of the Krishna consciousness was changing everything for the better. Maybe it was, but it didn't seem to think of it. It didn't really seem to matter to him. And at one point he was saying that we're not doing this for gaining popularity, but for achieving purity, or words to that effect. So the last question.
Hi Roland, thank you for such a nice class. I was just thinking, you were talking earlier about Prabhupada pushing the importance of reading the books. And it came to mind that now in ISKCON there's a kirtan sort of culture developing, especially in a lot of the youth group. And this attitude of kind of like, we can just do kirtan and that's enough, and for chanting that's enough. And I guess it was my understanding that we do only need one of those 9 limbs of bhakti to be able to reach that goal, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that importance of maybe combining the two.
Well, if you have to choose between the two, chanting regularly is probably the more important thing. But to stay in Krishna consciousness, to be convinced of everything, there's another dimension, and that is the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And in a sense, that's the staying factor. If you know the philosophy well, you won't buy into karmic philosophy. So it's important not only to read, but to study, and to discuss. I think that's one of the reasons why Prabhupada has us have a Srimad Bhagavatam class each day. It's an opportunity to think deeply about the philosophy and to discuss it. It's not just blind reading or scanning words in a book, but it's actually seeing what they mean. It's a very from my understanding, a very complex philosophy. It's not simple. It's not something you can understand in 1 minute, in 1 second. And Prabhupada's often said when people say, show me God, he said, well, I'll show you God when you're ready. After you study these books and get a little philosophically erudite, then it's time. So reading is important. And if one just chants and does nothing else, it's not a good sign. One should understand deeply, as far as possible, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and study it. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.